Welcome guys, what's up? This is Chris, and this is my Bloodborne lore. So we ended last time starting to talk about Old Yharnam. We started talking about how the healing church is giving blood to all these people to heal them, possibly. Depends on what you think Lawrence's motives are. But for right now, I'm going to consider Lawrence to be a good guy, which you could consider him to be bad. Regardless of either way, they're giving blood to the people, and all of a sudden some beasts start rising. Especially during certain moon phases, these people are turning into beasts, and then these hunters would hunt them. Now, I think it's interesting that we're going to talk a little bit about hunters today, maybe kind of where they came from and where they originated from, because I don't think the church really had anybody who could do something like that. Most of them, now I'm not saying scholars can't fight, but in reality, you know, these guys are studying all their lives, so when did they learn to hunt things, right? That's kind of the way I'm going to take it. They're not necessarily, like I said, not necessarily saying that they can't, and especially like the choir and them later on, way later on, they have the ability to use arcane arts and all that stuff. But I think at the beginning, the healing church needed hunters from somewhere. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. And then really this game talks about these hunts, right? These hunts happen. And it seems like they aren't the first time it happened when you start playing the game. The Hunter Chief emblem is a sign that this probably has occurred multiple times. And it says it's a cloth emblem that belonged to the captain of the church hunters long ago. Opens the main gate that leads to the round plaza of the great cathedral. The main gate is shut tight at nights of the hunt and could be only opened from the other side with his emblem. In other words, the captain's return and this emblem determine the end of the hunt. So if you skip ahead for a bit, and we'll come back to Old Yharnam, trust me, it will be answered here. But if we skip a little bit ahead, you get a guy called Ludwig, and he doesn't seem to be a loser. He seems to be a very popular person, highly popular. You see him in multiple item descriptions. He has his own weapon set. He has 2 hunter badges, one that talks about him, and then the other one you find later on in the church workshop that kind of makes him seem like he's this almighty thing. So, and we're going to talk about that. So that's the Radiant Sword Hunter badge you find in the old, not the old workshop, but in the church workshop at probably the top floor right before you hit the choir door. And it says the Radiant Sword indicates the heirs to the will of Ludwig. These hunters, also known as Holy Blades, are what remains of an ancient line of heroes that date back to a very early age of honor and chivalry. So what I like to really focus in on with this is that there's a will of Ludwig, or at least it seems like this, and it's an ancient line of heroes. We know Ludwig took over duties sometime after Gehrman. Could it have been right after? I don't think the game kind of points at it that it wasn't like directly after Gehrman, but it definitely could have been, you know. There's nothing that says it's not, but the game kind of makes it seem like there might have been a couple years or generations or something between Gehrman and Ludwig, but you know, it's kind of speculative a little bit. But I don't think Gehrman either didn't just die and then Ludwig appeared. I think there's something there that exists, but there were heroes after Gehrman. Gehrman seems to be a very important character also, and he seems to be a complete badass. But, you know, I think there were some heroes that came in afterward, and Ludwig was one of them. I like to focus in on that ancient line of heroes thing, because that means to me, like, there was a hero, and then there was another hero, and then there was another hero, and these heroes kept appearing one after another in a line. And if you can maybe kind of see where I'm going with that, but we'll talk about that in a minute. But the healing church seemed to also be able to recognize who these were, because they gave him this Radiant Sword Hunter badge. These, you know, it indicates they're the heirs to the will of Ludwig. So the church seemed to kind of know who these were. It's very interesting because we do know that sooner or later the church kind of breaks away from the hunters that we kind of know of. Now there are other hunters out there. You know, there are the black church hunters, the white church hunters. So there's other types of hunters. But most of them always pointed out that, you know, these weren't really hunters. Like, the white and the black church hunters were doctors, technically. And then the Yargle hunters really were just kidnappers. They weren't really hunters. So I think when you see in the game, especially if you ever notice when you're fighting certain hunters, they can riposte you or whatever you want to call it with their gun, but then they don't come up and they don't visceral attack you, right? They don't know what to do. And it's because they can't. They're not that hunter. However, there are certain ones that can. Gehrman being one of them. But then I believe the one you fight at the end of Eileen's questline, he can do it too, and he actually insta-kills you. I'm trying to think of any other ones, but if you think about those hunters, those may have been part of this ancient line of heroes, quote unquote, you know, and they were able to do the visceral attack. So there's something different about them than maybe these other hunters that aren't able to do it. Then again, that could just be a whole game mechanic thing. It could totally be nothing at all, and it's just like they didn't want to give you these guys who could all visceral attack you right off the bat. But it's just something to think about. Anyways, so let's just keep that line of heroes in mind as we talk about Old Yharnam. The game loves Old Yharnam. Like, you see it pretty close to right off at the beginning. They talk about the notes lying around talk about like it being a huge tragedy. They really want to get to your head that this was an event that happened and it was very important for some reason or another. It was a very important event, whether it's just to show you that what lengths the church will go to cover up maybe what they were doing, or to stop what they were doing, what they would do to it. Maybe that's what the notes are for. But I also think it's just trying to show you that something happened at this time, and that maybe people need to pay more attention to Old Yharnam and what was going around that time. It seems like most of these notes that have been written, not all of them, but most of them seem to be written probably by the people of Yharnam, and not necessarily like the church or Byrgenwerth or scholars or anything like that. It was probably written by the people who lived there, because they always felt like, you know, they were always talking about how tragic it was, or it just always gave you that feeling of tragedy. So that's why I think it was more about them, because it doesn't seem like the Healing Church or Byrgenwerth would have been too shocked by this. I don't know. It just seems like those places just weren't like, it's almost like they may have, not necessarily that they knew it was going to happen, but that that something like this happening wasn't a big thing to them. And that's partly because they knew these beasts were around already. I think really this is the first time in Old Yharnam when beasts really appeared to everybody. Like, people were like, oh my god, we're turning into beasts. If you read like the Hunter Armor set, hunts occurred at night, it said, and that's why the sets are always dark colored. I don't think that was so you could hide from beasts. I think beasts could see you in the dark whether you like it or not. In fact, in the game, whether you're in a dark area or a light area, they seem to be able to track you just fine. So I don't think that was really for that. I think it was more to conceal the hunters as much as possible from the people, so that people wouldn't be frightened by these hunts that were happening kind of behind them and without them really knowing. It's, you know, it's people might have had a conjecture or may have thought that something was happening, but they never had full proof until Old Yharnam happened, and then really there was nothing to cover up anymore. And that's why I don't think Byrgenwerth or Healing Church were too shocked by what happened, but I think they knew something on their hands right now was going to be uncontrollable. Like, they realized that, oh, something's not going right, and I think that's kind of what happens with Old Yharnam. So what really caused it, right? What events took place before it, or what events kind of took place right after or right on it that kind of started Old Yharnam? And I really want to look at 4 things that I kind of connect to this event. This is, again, this kind of speculation. I'm connecting these to this event, but the first one is the note in the lecture hall. It says the nameless moon presence beckoned by Lawrence and his associates, Pale Blood. Then after that, you have one of the 1/3 of umbilical cords from the old hunter workshop says, every great one loses its child, and then yearns for a surrogate. The 3rd umbilical cord precipitated the encounter with the pale moon, which beckoned the hunters and conceived the hunter's dream. Okay, so now here's what's interesting. I have the strategy guide. In the strategy guide, if you go look in the section with the 1/3 of umbilical cord, I may take a picture of this and put it in the video. I'm not 100% sure I'm going to do that yet. If you look at it, it says a couple things that are different than what it says in the game. Now, I don't know if this was like an error on their part. Like, did they get these descriptions like way ahead of time? And then what ended up happening is the game developers changed the descriptions because maybe they were too on the nose, but they never changed it in the strategy guide because either they forgot to go back to it and change it, or maybe they left it in there for a reason. Who knows? But the strategy guide says, on the, I believe this is the one from the Hunter's Workshop. It says, one of the heirlooms used to contact the Great Ones, originating in the child of the Vilebloods. Long ago, in an encounter with the Great Ones, a contract was established, establishing the Hunter's dream. And then if you go down, I think, to the one where Ariana gives you one, I think this is the same actually in both. I have to look this up again. I should have done this before I start talking. But it says every Great One loses his child and then yearns for a surrogate. And Adon, the formless Great One, is no different. To think it was corrupted blood that began this eldritch liaison. And so it's really interesting, especially that first one. I think that second one is what Ariana's umbilical cord says. But that first one is not anywhere else I can find in the game, unless I'm missing it somewhere. Someone can correct me down in the comments, but I'm pretty sure that is actually supposed to be maybe the old version of what the umbilical cord at the old Hunter Workshop said, because they're both talking about establishing the Hunter's dream, right? One says conceived and beckoned the Hunters. This one says established and establishing the Hunter's dream. So it gives you both views on that, and it's very interesting because you can really make a connection there. And that's kind of where most of my stuff is going to be coming from here in a minute, because I really think what ended up happening is that they ended up getting the description of it, and maybe it was too on the nose, and then they ended up not deleting it out of the strategy guide, and they kept the old one, and while the game replaced it and put a new one. I'm not sure if that's 100% true. Maybe there was a reason why they changed it or kept it the way it was. It just kind of seems like that to me, you know, maybe a little error, but it's very interesting to get that kind of clue from there. So to go off this error, because I'm an idiot and I like to do that. Oh, one more thing before I continue on is the Cosmic Eye Watcher badge. It's a badge of a member of the choir elites of the Healing Church. The eye signifies the very cosmos. The choir stumbled upon an epiphany, very suddenly and quite by accident. Here we stand, feet planted in the earth. But might the cosmos be very near us? Only just above our heads? Question mark. So with those items kind of in mind as we go on, I just kind of want to get those out there first, and then we'll kind of go into what the whole spiel of what I think is going on. And there's, like I said, this might get a little crazy. This might get a little speculative, and I will agree with you, but I kind of like the way I put it. That's bragging on myself, isn't it? I don't know if I like that so much, but definitely, you know, give it some thought. I'm definitely down for people saying that, and you guys know this, that you know, could I be right, could I be wrong? I don't care. You know, like I said, there's a lot of speculation going on, and I'm just gonna throw this out here, and we'll see where it goes, and see what I can come up with. And like I said, I try to use everything possible to explain myself when I say these things. So here we go. The Healing Church started to realize the moon is what's causing the men to turn the beast, right? You know this. The purpose for Lawrence of the Healing Church was to help people, never to harm them. He didn't really want to harm them, but he may have known that, you know, giving them blood may turn them to beasts, but at the same time, he's able to heal everybody. Then what did they not realize, maybe, or what they realized was what the moon was doing, or the blood that they were collecting was going on. In fact, it's entirely possible that the moon is the one who wanted them to feast on the blood in the first place. And it seems like the moon is doing all this because we kind of know from the future that they want to have kids. Like, the whole point of right now, it seems like, of the Great Ones is that they want to propagate. They want to keep their lineage going. But, and I think Miyazaki says this in his little Q&A that happens in the back of the strategy guide. He's like, what he really wanted to kind of show was that these Great Ones are so great and they're so powerful and whatnot, but as you gain more power and as you become more great, it's a lot harder for you to have kids. And you can kind of see that in our own food chain. As you go up it, you don't have as many more babies. You know, you only have, like, humans only have, you know, one at a time. You know, you can have multiple ones, but you only have one at a time, and it's a lot harder, you know, and a lot more effort and energy is involved than, you know, other animals in the kingdom. So, and I think he kind of was like, well, if you keep going above even humans, you know, how hard is it for gods to have kids, right? What's difficult about them? Why do they have a hard time? What makes them so difficult? So I think that's kind of what he wanted to kind of show, and he kind of says that in that Q&A section. So really, this is like the moon and the Great Ones in this game. They all want to have a lineage. They want to have kids, and they want to propagate because they want their quote-unquote race to keep going. And that's kind of the purpose, right? And it seems like as we go through the game, you see that more and more and more and more and more. So the church may eventually realize that the moon, not moon presence, but the moon itself, they see this moon in the sky, and that every time it changes into this certain way, or the way it looks for whatever reason, that these transformation on these beasts are happening. They realize during full moons, or I don't know why I put full moons, it could be any type of moon really, but to us in the game it seems like it's a full moon, that ladies like all of a sudden become pregnant. And this pregnancy thing kind of depends on if they're chosen or not. What makes them chosen, we don't really know, but we do learn a little bit from fake Iosefka or Yosefka that this chosen thing is true, because she says it in her dialogue. She's like, I am chosen, I am the one. So it doesn't seem like every woman ends up having a baby inside of them. In fact, Adela, the nun, doesn't. She just goes nuts like most of the other characters in the game. But Ariana does, Yosefka does, the old lady doesn't, which is, you could just say it's because she's old and she's not able to have kids anymore. But certain characters are able to, and certain ones are out. So something about being chosen is there. It could be dependent on the blood of the individual, right? The blood of the lady that is going to become impregnated. That might be why fake Yosefka is at real Yosefka's clinic making these celestial emissaries, because she knew that that you needed a certain type of blood to maybe get pregnant. And according to and I think I maybe say this a little bit later, but that type of blood could be what Yosefka is making at her clinic, and I think we talk about this a little bit later actually. So according to the game though, this cord has to come from somewhere, right? There has to be a first one. It just didn't seem like it appeared in some ladies, and it doesn't seem like maybe the moon made it happen. Something happened, right, to cause this cord to occur. And from the game itself, you just play the game, you really don't have a clue on where that came from. I don't think it really tells you anywhere in the game. This is where it happened. However, the lovely strategy guide, and with whatever you want to call its error, or with its extra information we can go with, says that the first cord came from the child of the Vilebloods. Now that's interesting, because when we're playing the game, she's trying to have another child. There could be reasons for that. We might talk about that later. But this whole thing, now we're going away from Yharnam again for a little bit, is we need to talk about Cainhurst and really what was happening there. Cainhurst existed, at least in the game it seemed to existed before, like Byrgenwerth kind of existed before, maybe even Old Yharnam existed kind of before this whole labyrinth and old ones and god stuff happened. They could have just been regular people, right? Cainhurst seemed to kind of be like that. It was a regular castle with people in it, and there were nobles and whatnot. However, we do know that a scholar from Byrgenwerth, I believe, gave them forbidden blood. Who that was, we really don't know. You could maybe say it was Lawrence. It could be, especially with what I'm saying here. Maybe you can make some connections there, but we just know that they were given forbidden blood. We know that when we go to Cainhurst, that they were infected by something called the Sanguine Plague, which didn't seem to be much different than the Ashen Blood Plague. Basically, you turn into beasts from having blood. It may have been a little different though, because maybe it's a different type of blood. This forbidden blood may not be the same blood that Lawrence is using for the Healing Church, at least at the beginning of the Healing Church. Because I do really believe that after they started getting more blood, because they were doing communion down in the labyrinth, so they were kind of just getting a bunch of mixed blood inside all these people. Could be why they all turned into beasts, right? But we know that Cainhurst was infected by something called a Sanguine Plague, which didn't seem to be much different. They used their servants as knights, quote unquote, and that to do the hunting for the beasts, and they considered it like art, and they were very noble people, and they were very like extravagant. Seemed like they talked in big words that really didn't. They were bombast, if you remember the game says. So, but they did enjoy the blood just as much as the people of Yharnam seemed to enjoy the blood, and I think that kind of make them get some mortal enemies because of that. This could be where like Logarians and its executioners come in play. They despise Cainhurst, and they call them the Vilebloods. And in fact, the nobility themselves knew they were infected, and the queen even says that, drink my blood, it's corrupt. So they knew that something was wrong with them. It could have been because maybe that forbidden blood was tricked upon them, or maybe it was forced upon them, but now they have to live with it. To survive, they have no choice but to do what they have to do. Well, to me, if you know you're corrupt, what do you want to do? Hey, there's a town over that has a healing church. Why don't we go try it? So to me, if you think you're corrupt, you know there's something wrong with you, and you see this other place that's dealing with blood and it's healing the people there, maybe you think yourself can be healed, or maybe your people can be healed. So what I think happens, and here comes some speculation. This is where I am making straight up stuff. I kind of use a little bit of the game and what it's talking about, but I literally am making this up right here. Is that I think that they kind of made an alliance with the Healing Church of Yharnam, of Old Yharnam, or the Healing Church of Yharnam. Now, this is speculation, but they are relatively close to one another. In fact, in game, you have the main cathedral, then you have a little area that kind of goes off to the side of it, and it leads to the road that connects Hemwick, and the Hemwick crossroads connect to Cainhurst. Now, the way you get to Hemwick is like kind of a back way, but if you look at the road, I think it points kind of towards Old Yharnam, or Yharnam itself. So it's very, very possible that this road connected. It is possible, actually, the way it looks, is that Yharnam and the Healing Church area was all connected to this road. This road went through Hemwick, and then it went straight to Cainhurst. And they were relatively close to each other. They didn't look like they were too far away. So it's possible that they coexisted at the same time, and they knew of each other, and that they were happening. Now, basically, for getting blood, just because that's all they were really doing, right? The Cainhurst was just getting blood from the Healing Church, different type of blood maybe, but they were getting blood from them, thinking that they could get healed. Maybe the Healing Church was like, well, Cainhurst, if you guys want blood from us, maybe you can provide us some protection, or maybe you can help us with these beasts. So Cainhurst provided Church of Yharnam hunters in return. Now, this could be interesting because it could mean and say that Gehrman, the first hunter of the hunter's dream, at least, or a hunter itself, came from Cainhurst. And I really want, and I'm really gonna put this up in the video, so it should pop up like right now, or sometime right now. If you look at one of the portraits on the wall inside Cainhurst, and I talked about this in my video, and I was like, this guy just looks important. There's a portrait, and it's in the room with all the portraits that you see. It's like the second room up the stairs. Like, you go up the stairs, and you go through Cainhurst, the first double doors you open, there's all the little servants scrubbing the ground, and then there are the ladies that appear. If you go upstairs, and then you go into the room to the left, there's that room full of portraits. Where there's one on the right against the far wall that seems to be lit by the moon. Very, secretly hit. Like, if you're not really paying attention, you don't notice it, but it looks like it's being hit by the moonlight, while all the other pictures don't seem to be so much. And I don't want to say it awfully looks like Gehrman, but I don't want to necessarily say it is Gehrman, but it does resemble, and they do have a resemblance. Now, this could be just like, they don't have time to make everyone look different in a video game, obviously, but at the same time, you have a painting. It's not like two character models. It's literally a painting, and comparing it kind of to a character model's face. They just look similar. Now, like I said, I'm not saying that is Gehrman. It could very well be, maybe, I don't know, but it shows that they have this like same facial features, same kind of feeling. I mean, the nose looks really similar to me. I don't know what it is about the nose, but they do look similar. So it could be very well that Gehrman is from Cainhurst. So Gehrman sets up a workshop inside of the Healing Church and says, "Yeah, we'll help you out. I'm the badass here," and he kind of sets up an area which we see in the game called the workshop. When we see it, it's called the Old Workshop. Now, he's kind of far away from home, right? And not real far away, but he's now has like a business in a weird way at the Healing Church in Old Yharnam. And he's dealing these things, and he's doing these things for the church. He starts the whole different armor, because the beasts are maybe different than the ones in Cainhurst. So the Cainhurst armor really isn't useful. But even though I think the Cainhurst armor, it says, was made of light silver plate, and it was really because they were hunting hunters. And this kind of sets up to what happens in Cainhurst and why they don't like the church anymore and things like that. But we'll get there. However, right now, Gehrman is kind of, he's far away from home. He misses it. And now here comes in speculation number 800. He creates a doll. And the doll kind of resembles the queen. No, I'm just playing. But he does create a doll, and it has the gray hair. And if you notice, like, if you use the wig or you put on the Cainhurst helmet, it seems like a lot of the people from Cainhurst all had gray hair or white hair or silver hair, or however you want to say it. So he creates this doll just kind of resemble the people he's been away from for a very long time, and the people he missed. And he created a lady doll. Well, this alliance between the two areas gives the queen a lot of blood, right? She's getting a lot of blood. Her people are getting a lot of blood. It's almost in a weird way like they're just getting blood from them, and they're not really maybe getting healed at all. This forbidden blood might be too powerful. Who knows, right? But they just keep getting it. And ultimately what this causes is a blood child to be born. Because we know in our world that she wants these blood dregs to have a blood child. So ultimately, after a long period of getting blood, sooner or later she's probably going to have a blood child. And this is the first actual scene, or first version of the 1/3 umbilical cord that appears in the world, which happens to technically now belong to Cainhurst. And it doesn't belong to the church or anywhere else. I thought about this for a second too. I was like, well, what if like one whole umbilical cord came out and they were like splitting it amongst themselves? I was like, I don't know, that's a little too much. So now, remember, if you get prego by a great one, more than likely at that time the moon is set really low, and especially probably at a time when a baby is actually going to happen. So in our game, we get a couple of those instances happen through different characters, but in this one right now, it seems like maybe there were some ladies with babies, but this one appeared and it seemed like it had a good chance of being something maybe. But like most first babies, and in case of this, the baby probably doesn't make it. But you still have a pale moon, it's letting low, and people are turning into beasts, especially in Old Yharnam. Cainhurst may have been doing the same thing. Maybe the people there were also turning. But for right now, we know that the people in Old Yharnam for sure are turning into beasts. Gehrman seems to be fine though, but even church members are turning, into these beasts. The reason Cainhurst might be alright though is because they still have that forbidden blood in them, and they're not necessarily the mixture of blood that you see on Yharnam's side. So that might be the difference why maybe Cainhurst kind of survives through this. The church kind of doesn't and is having a hard time, and that you can see kind of how this might lead down to them not liking each other after a while for who knows what reason, right? This also explains why high choir members and like people later on in like the school menses and stuff that really don't turn into beasts, because maybe they have the insight, their ability to see what really is going on, and their madness kind of keeps them from turning into beasts. So that kind of might explain why like Lawrence hasn't turned into one yet, or someone in the higher up choir and stuff like that seem to be okay. And then later in the game, you as a special hunter really don't turn into a beast either, because you're special. You're part of the moon presence itself, so he doesn't want you turning into a beast because he's using you for something else. Anyways, the healing church needs to do something about all this stuff, right? So they decide to pay Cainhurst a visit. And they know what happened. They know she had a blood baby. It's probably not a secret or anything. I mean, I'm pretty sure if this happened, it spread rapidly through just people talking. But again, the baby's dead. It didn't make it, right? Just like all Great One babies, they lose it, right? Explains why the queen wants another one in our game. Again, but one thing to remember is that a lot of the things in our game could be a lot of dreams and nightmares that have been going on from the things that happened previously. So you can always rely on that as a backup to what's going on. But the queen definitely wants to have another child in our game, because the first one died, didn't make it, just like every Great One's baby really doesn't make it. So, however, it left behind something of power, a cord of the eye, or as we know, 1/3 umbilical cord. Considering that probably by now choir's members understood, really delved into what eyes are. Bergenworth kind of knows, Willem knows, and we all know the choir kind of knows about this. They kind of decide that And you never know how they figure this out. Maybe they took it from them. Maybe they took it from Cainhurst by force. Maybe they, which is possible. Maybe they're like, screw y'all, this is ours because you're freaking up our city over here with your stupid baby being born. But you never know. But somehow they know that this thing feels like it can call upon a great one. So in doing so, whether it happened right then or later, maybe they did some experiments on it and then it happened. But whatever's happening, Old Yharnam is getting screwed. So they got to do this fast. And they end up making a contract, and they do call upon a great one. And it says in that item that you call upon a great one, and by doing so they created a contract, and then the hunter's dream was born. Well, guess who the messengers pick up to be their first hunter? It's Gehrman. And if you look at the hunter's badge, it says this badge crafted long ago at the workshop attests to one's prowess as a hunter of beasts. The workshop is gone, and no group recognizes this meaningless badge, except the messengers in the bath, who understand its profundity. Certain things can only be entrusted with a hunter in possession of this badge, or so they believe. So this is kind of showing that the messengers understand what this badge is, because it's a badge kind of coming back from the time of Gehrman, who they first picked. That's kind of my intake. That's my intake, but insight on that, kind of what that badge is trying to say. And Gehrman was their first one. But more importantly, or also as important, is that this is kind of where the dream has begun. Then you remember that eye watcher badge says the choir stumbled upon an epiphany, very suddenly and quite by accident. Here we stand, feet planted in the earth. But might the cosmos be very near us or just above our heads? The choir, and this is really where the choir starts looking for the cosmos. This is where they start kind of separating themselves maybe from the healing church a little bit, and a little bit more, and a little bit more. And start looking towards like, okay, there's some other stuff going on here. This is proof of it. And it's kind of like, what's the moon presence motive, right? Like I said, we know that, well, we don't know for sure, but we kind of have a hint that they want to have babies. So we know that's one of its motives. But what is its motive in wanting this contract so that it can create this hunter's dream? Why? For right now, at least to me, unless I come up with something crazier or better or makes more sense, it seems like it really wants to protect its babies. And to do that, it's formless. It doesn't, it only lives by voice. And I'm trying to make that connection that the moon president's probably Adon in some way or form. It's kind of a weird connection, and there's not much saying that it is or isn't, but it's formless, right? It doesn't appear until the very end of the game, and only to you in the hunter's dream. Otherwise, it doesn't exist technically, and it only lives by this voice, and his voice can be heard like through Gehrman, or maybe even Lawrence at times, but it's heard through these different people or the ruins or whatnot, right? It's heard. It has a voice. But it seems like it wants to protect its babies, and to do so, it can't do it, so it needs someone to do it for them, and that's where the hunters come in. You are to help kill the beast, because if all the beasts take over, and the beasts end up winning, and they end up killing everything, or going crazy, and annihilating everything, the moon presence, the great ones themselves, won't have anyone to have kids with. The beasts ain't gonna be able to do it. They don't have enough insight. They're stupid. So the funny thing about this, though, is that all these beasts are being created by the moon presence himself. So maybe he's like, I'm taking care of my own problem. This is how I'm gonna do it. But like I said, we don't really know too much about their motives, and it's kind of, I think, meant to be that way. You're just kind of not really meant to understand them completely, and maybe come up with your own views on why. But that's kind of what it looks like to me. At this point, the blood in the people seem to be all different types, and like I said, that might be why they're turning the beast. If they were all maybe one type, if they were all Adon blood or something like that, maybe they wouldn't all be turning into beasts. But because there's so much of a mixture in them of blood, because of all these communions in the labyrinth, and who knows where they're getting blood, that it just seems like something. It just seems like that's causing that maybe beasthood to come out of them. We know that the blood seems to be different because Adela and Ariana and Yosefka all have different bloods. Like, they all do different things. If they all did the same thing, then I'd be like, maybe they all have the same blood. But it seems like, maybe one person has this mixture of blood and this other one doesn't. And Yosefka is very interesting because she has a refinement, some sort of blood. It seems like it was refined in her lab, right? And it might be the moon presence blood that she has. And that might be why she knows at the note at the beginning of the game that you need to seek pale blood to transcend the hunt. The real Iosefka, figured that out, right, by getting this blood from refining it and stuff. However, fake Iosefka goes, well, she has this moon presence blood. I want to be chosen. So she goes down there and she takes his moon presence blood and stuff, starts creating maybe these celestial beings with it or whatnot, and then using them to even get more blood for herself so that she can become chosen. And she has the ability to have the insight, right, because she is a choir member. So that's maybe how you become chosen, and maybe be different. That could happen maybe by luck. Ariana had forbidden blood in her, you could tell by her blood. So kind of, to her, maybe it was more of luck than anything else. She ended up having more of a pure blood than everyone else, so she got chosen because of that. Something like this I'm going to explain probably a little bit more in like the Unseen Village and Moon episodes and stuff like that, but for right now I'm just going to leave it at that. So Gehrman is the first hunter, right? He's the first hunter of the hunter's dream. Not necessarily that he's the first hunter the world has ever seen, but he's the first hunter in the hunter's dream, and I think that's what his title is really meant to be. He ends up, this is where I kind of didn't really know where to go with this, right? Because I don't know if he ends up helping against Old Yharnam and he's able to destroy the beast, but the city's gone too far, or does he automatically become the caretaker and then there's another hero involved, right? There's another person that gets built up. I don't think it'd be Ludwig right off the bat, but who knows? Maybe Dejura is the one that comes up next, and he kind of fails, and he's like Gehrman's first attempt at failure, or maybe as Gehrman's apprentice. That apprentice we don't really know about too much. You know, we have no say really who it could be. Apprentice makes sense though, right? And that's why that grave is right there. It was his first one, blah blah blah, special, who knows. But we do know that Old Yharnam's gone too far at a certain point, and that they know that, but they do learn one thing from this tragedy, is that fire is really good against beasts. So they decide to kind of scorch the city and start anew in a different part, kind of not too, they build Yharnam, the other part of Yharnam, a little bit higher. So I think Gehrman realizes that he's trapped in this dream. He knows of Lawrence, he knows of Willem, because he's probably met them through his travels and his hunting and whatnot. He may have only heard of Willem, but he knows of him. But he's probably met Lawrence if he started this workshop and stuff like that at the Healing Church. And it kind of maybe explains his nightmares a little bit more. He's wondering when they're gonna free him from this contract that they made. That this contract, and when Gehrman is gonna be free, when is it gonna finally be over for him? Sooner or later. Whether it's after Old Yharnam or further down, after maybe even a little bit longer, he finally kind of gets that second ending that we get in the game, the second ending where he didn't have to fight anyone because he was the first one, so he just skipped that part. But the moon presence finally shows himself to him, maybe after a couple cycles of the hunt or whatnot, shows himself to him, and then he becomes to be the caretaker of the dream. And then his own doll ends up being the one that kind of pushes around him and takes care of him. And that's kind of where his story kind of begins as the caretaker. Now, whether it's, like I said, further down or maybe right away, let's remember that lineage of heroes, and here comes one of the first ones, Ludwig. So that's where I'm going to end this episode. Hope you guys liked it. I know there's a lot of stuff in there. I kind of think about these things. I don't know. Like I said, if you guys want to talk about it, I'm always down. Love hearing comments, whether good, bad. Telling me you're an idiot. Telling me, hey, that was a good idea. I like that. Whether each way. But I thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for listening. Also, yeah, I didn't really mention it last time, but the video of me playing right now is me going through the whole labyrinth. It's kind of past the halfway point. I think I'm in like Loran, and then I'll be going into his Chalice dungeons. But that's what the video is that's going on in the background. Just kind of give you something to watch, and then I'll injecture certain things like I kind of did this episode. So, but thank you guys again for watching. We'll start up next time talking about Ludwig and a little bit more about what happened and what leads to kind of where we're at right now, and where maybe all these dreams and nightmares come from. Might hit up on some School of Mensis, Unseen Village, things like that. But guys, I will check y'all out later. Peace out. Have a good time.